Are the mics on? We good?
We're keeping mics on this time.
Okay.
Did everybody hear that? We're not turning them on.
Evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:20 PM. The following directors are present tonight. Director Stepp, Director Ramirez, Director Kuhlenberg, Director Torres, Director Teitler. Meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreters via Zoom who will now share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function.
Hola, buenos
Oh, no
días.
one's
Hello.
on. Okay. Can we go ahead and move forward? Great. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Directors, you have just approved the agenda as presented. Our next item is our opening celebration by our superintendent, Dr. Rodriguez.
Hey, good evening. I have a few things I wanted to share with you also. Since we last saw each other, we've officially kicked off our levels meeting. So far, we've had leadership, professional development for principals and assistant principals of all levels. Last week, specifically with elementary school principals, and this week will be with tomorrow, our middle school principals. And we're off to a really great start, starting to dive into some of the MTSS work for one of our strategic initiatives, specifically around attendance. I also want to share with you all that a couple weeks ago, I participated in a film interview with an organization called A Queer Endeavor from the University of Colorado in Boulder. Felt really honored that they would reach out and invite me to be a part of that film, specifically asking a little bit about my journey as an ally and co-conspirator to the LGBTQIA plus community, and also just some of my work over the years and some of my vision for supporting LGBTQIA plus students and staff. We have also, and I'm not trying to steal y'all's thunder. I know you all may be sharing this a little bit later on in the appreciations, but really excited that over the last couple of weeks had the opportunity to visit some of our schools with each of you specifically. So just a quick shout out to Roaring Fork High School, Glenwood Springs High School, and Basalt High School. We had the opportunity to see our staff engaged in a lot of great things with students, and our students really engaged in the learning. So I wanted to celebrate that. Last week, I participated with the Keystone Policy Center in a discussion about affordable housing for teachers with a few other folks on the call, including the Commissioner of Education, Katie Anthes. And of course, the topic of conversation there is that as a state, and not just as a field of education, but really thinking about land developers and government officials and community in general, really needing to come together to support all educators, so that educators have the opportunity to live in the communities where they serve. So again, just a really staunch advocate there on that work. And I want to share lastly a few things. So one, since then, have also had the opportunity to engage in several back to school nights with schools, which have been super fun. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to go rafting on the Colorado River with the sixth graders from Glenwood Springs Middle School. And last week, had the opportunity to meet with a student group from one of our high schools that has been, I think, one of the sorry. Just one of the highlights of my first couple of months here in the school district. Our students, amazing, make me really hopeful about the future of our valley and our state and our country and the planet in general. Every opportunity I get to share with them, most are so much further along than I was when I was their age. So a really proud moment for me, but our students just very generous, vulnerable, transparent, honest with their feedback about the things that have worked really well for them in their experience as students here, and as well as some of the more challenging experiences that they've had in our schools. And so just really honored to have had the opportunity to learn from them and lead our school district with them in mind. So that's been one of the highlights. And I think that's the conclusion of my celebrations for this board meeting. So I'll turn it over to our team who are going to talk to you all a little bit about attendance, our disaggregated PSAT and SAT data and early literacy. So our Chief Academic Officer, Stacy Park, and our instructional facilitator and READACT and Title I coordinator, Heather Howe, will turn it over to you all for the superintendent update.
We'll stop and smell the flowers. A lot.
From experience.
That's what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Stacey Parker, Chief Academic Officer, and I have my colleague here, Heather Howe, the Title I and READACT coordinator and instructional facilitator. I'll be presenting an update on our attendance for PSAT assessment data, which I mentioned the last board meeting, and READACT data this evening. So I'm going to start with our attendance. As we know, attendance at school and timeliness is a key factor in students having successful learning progress. And so I wanted to start with sharing so far our average daily attendance as of last Friday for one of our schools was 94.1%. This is actually a graph pulled from a timer, which is under will soon be our main data platform. And through this, we're able to see trends in different ways. This is one of the examples you can see here by grade. We also pull data by day of the week, race, as well to see who is more impacted and who needs to follow up with. This is part of our larger work of making sure that we're taking a systemic approach to identifying students who are at risk and providing necessary supports to addressing the barriers associated. So the trends that we see is that we have 94.11% overall. We pull that out by our Hispanic Latino students and our white students. We see a few percent difference between them. And our average daily attendance at this point in the year show us currently to be on a slight decline from pre-pandemic levels. In the 2018-19 school year, our average daily attendance by the end of the year for both subgroups of students was a little over 95%, 95.61 for our Hispanic Latino students and 95.88% for our white students. Our school leaders are and staff and responsive services have been closely monitoring attendance, again, addressing barriers and providing timely support, particularly as we know each day of the school year as we go and we miss more, we want to make sure that we prevent that. A quick note about the attendance data, as I think we all know with our data systems, when we are closely examining it, make sure that we are accurately entering it, capturing it consistently. Those are one of the things that because of this close monitoring, we're ensuring that it is accurately and consistently captured. I'll move on. See, I don't know if there's a way to adjust the, yep. Thank you. Our last board meeting, we presented the performance and growth by grade for our students on the PSAT, PSAT and SAT, and brought this time our subgroup performance. As you can see, hopefully on your copy of this deck, there's an overall slightly lower performance levels in the state in the evidence-based reading and writing. And you can also see that our percentage of white students at or above benchmark is 2 to 3 times higher than our Hispanic Latino students in both subjects. This is a trend that I know the last meeting as well, when we presented data, is similar. When we look at growth, overall within this, we're within the state median for growth, but below in math. And there's disparate growth between subgroups. One thing that this data being from the end of last year, one thing that we do make regular practice is to ensure that we are pulling our subgroup data and being explicit about the subgroup goals that we have for growth and performance, and it's pulled out into the school leaders' goals for the school. Next, we have our 2022 REDACT data. This is the end of last spring. And so for some context for folks, the REDACT, as part of the state of Colorado's REDACT, we do administer the DIBELS Next assessment to kindergarten through 4th grade students whose first language is English. And in our monolingual schools, the EDEL is administered to our kindergarten 4th grade students for whom Spanish is their first language. And in our dual language and biliteracy programs. Both assessments are research-based assessments, and they're designed to assess the students' basic literacy skills. It's also an assessment that's approved by the CDE. So in the 2018-19 school year, we have a comparison here from the end of year 2019 and end of year 2022, quote, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So you'll see here that 50% of students across the district scored at in kindergarten through 4th grade scored at or above benchmark levels on the DIBELS Next. And while we are not yet where we'd like to be overall in 2022, we essentially rebounded post-pandemic to 55% at or above benchmark in 2022 overall. For the EDEL, in the 2018-19 school year, with 39% of students at
performing at or above benchmark. And in the 21-22 school year, there was a drop from 39% to 32% of students scoring at benchmark or above. And as you can see, we have not quite rebounded with our students whose first language is Spanish. Director Heitler asked a great question about cohort data. So we have some of the cohort data here. In 2019, the kindergartners from 2019 on the DIBELS, 56% were at or above benchmark. At the end of 2022, that same cohort of students were third graders and about 55% at or above benchmark there. And when we look at our first graders as well, 2019 pre-pandemic, we had 50% at or above benchmark. And a great highlight is that as fourth graders in 2022, it's 64% at or above benchmark, which is exciting, especially because in this next slide, we have not good news, which is that our for kindergarten through third grade students, sorry, kindergarten, students who were kindergartners in 2019, whose first language is Spanish, a dramatic decrease in students who are performing at or above benchmark on EDEL. From 51% of our kindergartners on EDEL performing at or above benchmark, and then as third graders at the end of 2022, just 18% of third graders performing at or above benchmark. And what you could see is that the red bar, which is the far below, has increased dramatically. As part of our response to this, since this data was from last spring, we are supporting schools through increased focus on coaching, student work protocols, backwards planning, in addition to other practices to identify where students might need additional supports. And this is ongoing to supplement the core curriculum that's at schools. So in sum, the data that we have looked at both last week and this week is, again, not where we want to be. It is not something that, it is something that we know and identify as an area, a deep area of opportunity, particularly in narrowing the difference in achievement between our subgroups, in addition to elevating the achievement of all of our students.
Thank you, Chief Park. It's now time for board discussion. Each board member will have 1 minute to ask your initial questions or share comments. After each board member has shared, there will be 5 minutes of open discussion, followed by another round of board questions and comments. And we will begin with Director Ramirez.
Thank you, guys. I did have a question on those last, the DIBELS and REDAC. When we're talking about 2019 being at 51% or 50%, do we know the size of that grade level? The size of that, that group of first grade for DIBELS or IDEL? I just want to know if that has changed, if that number has changed from 2019 to 2022.
I think I want to.
You look at the, sorry, the last slide, the EDEL K third grade cohort.
Yeah.
In 2019, on the far right, there's a blue number that says 133.
Yes.
So 133 kids took the assessment, and then it has, for example, in the yellow, 31 students were approaching, and then 68 were meeting.
Mm-hmm.
In this particular case, you can see that significantly less kids in third grade took the same assessment, so only 73 did. But if you look at the other grades, the other cohorts, it's pretty close.
Yeah, thank you. I hadn't noticed. I knew there was a blue number, but I didn't know what it meant. Thank you. I also had a question on your memo at the bottom. There was some data, and I tried following that that's information, but I was hoping that you could go into a little bit more detail about that.
This was the cohort 2019 kindergartners to third graders. Yes.
Okay, and the 35 in 2019 to 24, is that I couldn't find that percentage in here, so I wasn't sure which one that was.
For the percentage of students, and this is for the kindergarten through third grade, which is the cohort performance. So The numbers there. The percentage of students scoring far below benchmark is the red line. So it's not listed in the overall at or above. You
Oh,
can
I
actually, they're tiny numbers, which is why I put it in the memo because it's very hard to see. But it describes the numbers that are actually represented in the colored graph.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Director Torres.
Thank you. And totally on the same path of what Jasmine, Director Jasmine mentioned as well. If the percentage of students was lower, obviously that's impacting that specific cohort. Is that going to be targeted? Is that a cohort then that you'll monitor and look at the participation to see a more perhaps accurate reflection?
For sure. And I think I'm glad we pointed out that the number of students who took the EDEL, for example, was different. Yes, we will pay attention to that. We do want to make sure that our cohorts are growing as well as the overall performance.
Director Tyler.
I want to say thank you for including the cohorts. And I do have a few questions also about the EDEL data. I'm wondering if you can explain how we are getting, for example, in the school year 18-19, 467 children testing in Spanish, because I'm not understanding that data when we barely have bilingual programs. And so why are we having that many children testing in Spanish? And if we're not continuing to test in Spanish, would the results being poor be because they haven't received any instruction in Spanish and their results are just from instruction in English? So their Spanish has gone down because they haven't had any Spanish instruction.
I want, and please do feel free to chime in on. Yep.
So, so you know that the EDEL assessment is only given to students who are getting instruction in Spanish. And so that is only the students that are at 3 of our schools that we're providing. We have our 2 dual language, and then another school that's has a biliteracy program. And so that is the only schools that we are using the EDEL assessment because they're getting instruction in Spanish.
Thank you. So I still question, so in 2022, there are 73 third graders in our district getting instruction in Spanish?
So there's 73 that was assessed in EDEL. I am not positive why the difference, if we've had a drop in enrollment. I also see that the blue numbers are very small. But that was the district data that I was able to pull from our Amplify site. But all students that are receiving, and this would include English and Spanish students, anyone receiving Spanish instruction.
Interesting. Okay, and then I guess just my last question, I know time's going, but I'd be curious to know if the 73 includes a lot of newcomers that have received it. And I'm also curious to know if you could tell at a later time about phonics instruction and how that is taught at what grade levels and when English phonics is introduced and how that could have an effect.
They answer his question.
I don't know if I think that's for a future, maybe
Okay.
ask.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Stepp.
Hi, thank you for all this data. It's really interesting. Since everybody asked about the test scores, I'm going to ask about attendance. I know that you said that the school leaders have it in their priorities to look at this. And you may not know, what that is, like how they're going to address it. I guess the question that comes up is, at what point is there an intervention? Is it like a student misses a week because they're sick, or they miss every last period because they cut out, or they go for lunch? And because you notice in high school, it's a lot lower, so they have a lot more freedom and they're not making good choices, as knowing as a mother of a high school person. So like, just, kind of what their plans are, when do they intervene?
Yep, that's a great question. So from 1 through 3 absences, the attendance specialist is making the phone calls to remind students and families of the expectations for attendance. After the 3rd absence, the attendance specialist refers to a family liaison who reaches out to make a contact call to ask what barriers might exist for attendance. Through the process of the attendance specialist following up with the students as well as the family liaison getting looped in, we're able to find out, is this a matter of transportation or 2 days a week? A parent's like, I work on Tuesdays and Thursdays and I don't feel comfortable sending my child alone to the bus stop. So then engaging with a neighborhood family, say, great, there are 5 families next to you or near you, let me connect you with them. So that's an example of a specific type of intervention to remove that barrier. In terms of the high school, like period attendance, these are good questions, but and that is something when looking at period attendance for students, we're seeing if there's a consistent pattern in a particular class or particular student that triggers the leader or attendance specialist or family liaison to follow up with them, crew teacher to follow up with them to figure out what the root cause is and try to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for coming and presenting this to us tonight. I just want to circle back to the same numbers that we've talked about. So the students that are taking the EDEL are students that are being instructed in Spanish. Are the teachers identifying who takes the DIBELS versus the EDEL, or are students taking both?
So both students, or the student will take both assessments, but during our first assessment window, and that's what the information that we send to the state, all students take that in their L1, which is their first language. And then in the second window, outside of that, they take L2. Now this data reflects both of those, all of the data that we take, but we do make sure that they are able to take that in their first language.
Okay. Thank you. That was my only question on that. So directors, we now have 5 minutes for an open discussion with each other, and then we'll circle back and go through one more time and come back to you if anything else comes up.
And I don't want to break the protocol, but I'm happy to answer, Kenny, your question, but yeah.
Okay.
Wait,
That's
okay.
fine.
Directors, if you want to kick us off.
Well, I guess I just say I appreciate seeing this data and having it disaggregated. We recently went to go tour Glenwood Springs High School, and just being able to look at these SAT look at these numbers. One of my questions was just in reflection of, how do we support students who might be economically disadvantaged to pay for this test. And I just wonder if we've ever asked our students what kind of support, or even if they feel supported in taking these tests, and if there's anything we can do as a board to help our principals and mostly our students feel more comfortable and feel more capable of taking tests like this, because they are a pretty big deal.
So similarly, I'm curious, do we know what time these tests are offered? What day of the week these tests are offered? I'm thinking too, a student who may not have gotten to school on time, did not eat because they didn't have any food at home, didn't have the ability to really prepare to take this test, could score very differently if the test is then offered, if we provide a meal or a snack or something before a test to ensure everybody is at obviously the best that we can be before test taking. So I'd be curious about preparation for students that take this test and how that might impact the scoring or how well they do.
I think, Jasmine, your question about economically disadvantaged and whether that plays a role, I know at least at Roaring Fork High School, and I think it's the same for the other schools also, all children are given the test in school and have the opportunity at least to take it once, but that doesn't talk about then people who are able to take it a second or a third time. And so it'd be interesting to have some kind of data about who is taking it one time and who is taking it multiple times, and what is the study that happens in between there.
I think just to add to that too, I also wonder if parents in our district whose kids are taking these tests are fully aware of what it means to us, be providing these classes and these opportunities. I just wonder if there is a conversation to be had there with parents of students as well.
I mean, it's just, again, for future thing is there's so much emphasis placed on the test. And we talked about that earlier, and we test a lot, right? We do the CMAS and we do this one, and we did starting from kindergarten all the way up. I think by the time they get to the 11th or 12th grade, there's like, oh God, another test. But if there's a way to create something internal to test in a different way, those students who don't do good on tests, right? But whatever that may look like, I don't know, but this is a small snapshot of achievement, and how else can we look at it? And are all these paper, or are they, I know I'm asking a question, are they computerized or paper, or is there a mix of them?
I know the SAT is all computerized
SAT is.
and the PSAT also.
I just remember going to Two Rivers last year, and they were in the middle of the CMAS, and it was all paper, and they had like piles and piles. I'm like, really? We're still doing paper?
For CMAS, that seems odd too.
Wasn't it CMAS?
I mean, there's,
They were doing paper tests. I can't remember if it was CMAS, but they were definitely doing paper tests.
I don't think it would be
Wow.
CMAS.
I'd have to ask Jamie, but it's, it's just that, are they comfortable using the technology to do the test?
Can we just talk? We only have like half a minute about the data. I'm just curious about asking the question of, if we're saying that kindergartners are taking this test in both languages, I'm really surprised that the data would be showing higher, because if we're having second language learners taking it in Spanish, so people who are coming in the kindergarten level with no Spanish basically as Anglos, how their scores wouldn't be lower to begin with and then go higher if they had a couple of years, if we're including the Anglos. That's just very surprising to me on that scores.
So we're about out of time on discussion, so I'll go ahead and shift us over back to 1 minute for each director. And we will start back with you, Director Ramirez.
Thank you. Yeah, I did have a question. So just looking at these snapshots really quick, how many students actually took, do we know how many students? Because the growth says 40, all students, it says 49, but that doesn't make sense.
Which
For
snapshot?
both the SAT suite, the SAT suite of assessments.
I see. Those numbers are the growth percentile, not the number of students.
Oh, got it. So do we know how many students took?
I don't know the exact number, and so I would need to get that to you in terms of our 10, 11, 12.
And then my other question was, when we're talking about attendance, I mean, obviously teenagers, but is there a reason, or is there something that is being done today on the fact that we have so many students in, it looks like 10th grade, just not showing up? Are we trying to capture what is happening?
Yeah, because leaders have a closer focus and are able to use this tool really effectively, they're able to identify and respond, whether that's, let's look at the subject, like crew in many schools is first part of the day, where are the absences happening? I mentioned before that we're also working to make sure data is accurate. And so sometimes in my conversation with principals, they'll say, I don't know if that's accurate and here's why, but we are working to make that accurate. And so separate from that, the leader is actually asking those questions because they notice this in the data is an action that's happening.
Thank you.
Director Torres.
Thank you. So there's a follow-up with attendance. You're saying you're not sure how accurate that is. Is there a way to see, is the majority of the attendance missing in the morning? Or is it a full day? If they are showing that they didn't show up, is it because they didn't show up the entire day, or perhaps they showed up and missed
So for
First
schools
two.
that have period attendance or middle and high schools, you can pull out the period attendance. For elementary schools, attendance is taken in the morning and the middle of the day. And you are able to see and pull those reports from Infinite Campus as well. So we can identify to the period level where the absences or attendance is happening.
I'd be really curious to see the level of, students that are missing in the morning attendance, but are there for the afternoon.
Yeah.
After reading just a handful of different types of evidence that show that students that get a later start because they've had more sleep, if starting in the later time in the day is actually an effective learning strategy for them. Thank you.
Director Tyler.
I was wondering if I could ask another question on the EDAL, where it went from 133 students to 73 students. Do we know who the 60 students are that didn't take that? And do we also know how many of the 73 students that took it in third grade were this, if they were the same students of the 133 in the beginning?
I'll defer to.
I would have to dig into that and to segregate all of that data. I'm not sure that Amplify provides that level of dissection, but we could definitely check into that and get back to you.
It just seems with like almost half the numbers, it's hard to think that there is really a good correlation in that data. And I would think that looks a little suspicious perhaps, and maybe not worth digging into too hard as we have a problem because it went down like that. I also and I know you brought this up about the differentiation between how our Anglos are doing and our Latinos are doing. If we look at the SAT scores, again, we have that Anglo students went up over the 3 years and our Latino students didn't. And so not only is there a differentiation in how they're succeeding, but there's a differentiation in how well they're doing over time. And why, again, I think it's important for us to have some kind of strategic plan that focuses on our Latino students.
Thank you, Director Tyler. To finish us out, Director.
Oh, I
Director.
thought so.
Maybe I've elevated you. To finish us out, when I was looking at the difference in looking at the EDAL and the DIBELS were looking first to fourth, the EDAL were looking at kinder to third. And so the first thought that comes to my mind is that learning that happened in those 2 years during COVID and the importance of first and second grade and that basis that they have in phonics and in reading. And if we have missed the boat in some way with this cohort of students and what we can do to right the ship. And I don't know if you all, I'm not by no means am I professional in this, but if that is something that we're thinking about, or if that is something that we're attributing this difference to.
Just want to comment. I don't think there's ever a time we could say we missed the boat because we would never give up on our
Right.
children.
Right.
I think I'll let you speak to the interventions and.
Yeah, so I think in 2019-20, we adopted a new guaranteed viable curriculum that is really giving access to all students and providing them an opportunity to build background and really access and dig into authentic text. So that is really exciting. Also, yes, we've got all the components of reading, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. All of those components are very, very important. We have some things in place to meet students that are not reading at grade level or just aren't there yet. We provide intervention, and that's also in alignment with CDE requirements, 30 minutes of intervention, and then we put them on a read plan. But that is a contract that we work with parents, and when applicable, we write a literacy goal and a language goal if that is helpful. And so constantly looking at data, we are providing explicit instruction in the skills that they need through that small differentiated groups, and they're fluid and making sure that we're targeting what they need to be successful while including the joy of reading.
Right. Thank you. And Maureen, I'm sorry, I got to the end of the table and didn't come back to the beginning. So-
That's okay. I didn't have any further
Director Stem,
questions.
okay.
That's why I didn't say anything.
My apologies. I was in the habit of end of the table and back to me. Well, thank you both very much. We really appreciate you guys coming, presenting this. As hard as it is to swallow sometimes, and we're here to support however we can. Thank you. Okay. At this time, we would welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. However, tonight, no one has signed up. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may also do so in writing at any time. So the next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board meeting, and policies JKD, JKF, JKG, ECA/ECAB, and EAEF on second and final reading. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
My second.
Call to vote.
Director Step,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director Torres,
Aye.
Director Topper.
Aye.
Motion passes.
It is now time for board discussion. Each board member will have 1 minute to share comments. For this round, we will begin with Director Torres.
All right, I just wanted to reiterate that in reviewing the policy, I appreciate that this outlines the policy that needs to be followed, while the regulation, can you hear me? Okay, where the regulation is where we really get to identify the process in which, if the board is mentioned in a policy, or if any staff members are mentioned in a policy, what they need to follow, I think is an important distinction to note in reviewing these policies, as discussed before in the work session.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
I just think it's a good thing that we're reviewing a lot of these policies that have been dormant for a long time. And so I think it's a good step.
Thank you. Director Step.
I just want to reiterate what we had talked about in our work session about what we're voting on is the final clean copy after the first reading, and we have all the edits and the suggestions back and forth, and then we have kind of a final policy that goes into the books. That would be helpful. It's good to see all the edits and where they came from and why, but then it's good to have a final without all that.
Director Ramirez.
Yeah, alongside what everyone said already, and also to add that I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of our team in making sure that we were not only, especially when it came to the expulsion and suspension policies, that we were being really thoughtful of what it could look like for the future of our district and our students. And so I really appreciate all of the work that went in to make these policies come forward as they are.
And to finish this out, I just want to echo that. We can clearly see in the policies, the comments, that these have been carefully considered by you all, and you've made really thoughtful changes to them. I think we all recognize the importance of this work as a board, and understand that these are our guiding policies that determine how this district runs day to day. So thank you all for the work you've put into it, and we are committed to continuing to get this done. So thank you. Okay, so we had nothing pulled off of the consent agenda, so we will move on to action items. The next business in order is action on a board proclamation honoring Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve the proclamation honoring Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month as presented.
I second this motion.
Now time for board discussion. Each board member will have 1 minute to share comments, and we will begin with Director Tyler.
I appreciate this proclamation. I appreciate the fact that, as it was said, that I think I might be missing, but I think 57% of our district is Latino at this point. And so it's an important thing that we're recognizing that. And so I think it's important to have this Latinx Heritage Month, but I'm a little apprehensive of having it just in the sense as we're giving them a month. And it's a month now that we're celebrating them. And then after this month is over, we can go to just back to business. And so I think there's a danger in that also of selecting it out as a month. And especially when we're talking about a majority population of our district. And so while I think everything that is in this is important, and I agree with, I'm a little bit not, I support it. I think it needs to go beyond the month.
Thank you. Director Stepp?
I don't have anything specific about the proclamation, but I would just ask the other directors that in the future, if we have something like this that we want to bring forward, just to maybe give a heads up versus it showing up on the agenda, just so that we're aware, kind of like we did earlier with the Housing Coalition. You know, it's just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is why, and I'm going to bring it to the next meeting would be helpful, I think, for me anyway. I know we don't have to. It's more of a one of those rules of engagement, I guess. I don't know. But no, I think it's great. And I agree with Kenny that it can't be a one and done thing.
Thank you. Director Ramirez?
Well, I just want to say thank you to the team because I sort of just asked if this was a possibility and then you guys took it and ran with it. And I got to read it to my mom this morning. Oh, sorry. I typically don't get emotional. She's had 4 children graduate from our district. I'm really sorry. I hope I can read this. And she has 2 grandchildren. And it was amazing, to say the least, to hear her, to see her get emotional, and also to just hear her say how, guys, don't tell my mom I did this, okay? But to also just express how she felt seen as a parent and as a grandparent. And so I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Director Torres?
I appreciate and I think that this is a valuable recognition of honoring those in our community that, as Kenny pointed out, are actually the majority, the 57%, and really pointing out that not only are we one community, but that we celebrate those differences, I think is an incredibly important part of the work we do. We are not just educators in the classroom, but educators outside the classroom as well. And this, to me, speaks to why our differences in diversity are important. And to celebrate that, I think, is pretty significant.
I also fully support this proclamation, and I definitely hear what your comments are, Director Tytler. But I think this is a great first step to be taking this year and kicking off the school year with this. And hopefully this becomes an annual tradition that we can circle back to remember that important fact that a majority of our students are Latinx, and we do need to be celebrating them year round. So with that, I'm going to add in, do we vote first or have Jasmine read this first? Oh, okay. Yeah, we're not voting. So Director
When did we
Ramirez will now
approve?
read our proclamation.
I'm curious of when we approved it.
We all just gave our approval.
I see that. That's a good point. Thanks for
Sorry, I
trying to be
see
formal
your, I
that
see
way.
your highlight in there. So Director Ramirez will now read our proclamation.
Thank you. Roaring Fork Schools Board of Education proclamation honoring Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month. Whereas each year, the United States observes National Hispanic Heritage Month commencing on September 15th and lasting through Saturday, October 15th. We celebrate the culture, heritage, and countless contributions of the Hispanic or Latinx community to our country. And whereas we recognize that given the hardships and disparities faced by the Hispanic or Latinx community, This proclamation is only a small step of many that we need to take to be truly inclusive and supportive of our Hispanic or Latinx students and their families. And whereas 57% of our students enrolled in the Roaring Fork School District are Hispanic or Latinx, and Spanish is the second most commonly spoken home language in the district. And whereas we believe our diversity is a strength, where our students' diverse ethnicities and cultures create rich educational and cultural experiences for the entire school community. And whereas we remain committed to serving, inspiring, and promoting student success while improving student equity and access to high-quality education. And now therefore it be proclaimed that the Roaring Fork School Board of Directors do hereby proclaim September 15 to October 15th to be Hispanic or Latinx Heritage Month in recognition and celebration of the many contributions by the Hispanic or Latinx community to our valley. Be it further resolved that the Roaring Fork School Board of Directors support the district's current equity-related strategic priorities around addressing differences in achievement, launching equity, professional development, and tools for staff, launching the bilingual communication plan, creating additional career pathways, developing an education opportunity fund for lower paid and underserved employees, and strengthening the Equity Advisory Council. Be it further resolved that the Roaring Fork School Board of Directors strongly encourages staff and community to observe, recognize, and celebrate the culture, heritage, and contributions of the Hispanic and Latinx community to our country, our state, our cities, and our schools.
Thank you, Director Ramirez.
I was just gonna ask, are you gonna have that translated and have a Spanish version?
That would be beautiful.
Yes. I'm getting the yes. Okay, now to jump into the policy. So the next business in order is action on policy ECAF. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve policy ECAF as presented on second of three readings.
Second,
I second this motion.
we'll move into discussion. We'll begin with Director Stepp. Oh, I'm gonna call him.
I don't have anything at this one.
Thank you. Director Ramirez.
I just wanted to add that, I am grateful that we have regulations that have been set in place, and I do feel like there's been clear communication at this point in regards to the use and installation of video surveillance on our school transportation vehicles, especially those transporting students to and from school and activities. And so I appreciate, and I'm very hopeful that we will continue to make sure that we not only have cameras and audio recording capabilities, but that they are all in working order.
Director Torres.
I just wanted to say I appreciate having the reasonable efforts be made, that everything is obviously going to be used as effectively and efficiently as we hope it always will be, recognizing that, it's always sometimes beyond your control if something at the last minute. I want to be clear too, that this by no means replaces the responsibility of behavior. This is a means in which to have another set of eyes, but doesn't replace well, I don't need to really pay attention to what they're doing because it's on the camera. Just to be clear, sometimes there's this sense of, well, there's a video camera or there's a recording device, therefore I don't really need to monitor an area. So this is a backup to whoever, if you're in a bus with a coach, the coach is still, I would assume, being responsible for whatever needs to happen, but this is a backup to ensure that people are following the rules.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
I would just like to back up what Director Torres said. I think it's really important, her point, and I'm good to go. Thank you.
Now it's me. Yeah, I'm comfortable with this policy as written with the changes that we've incorporated. So thank you for getting this in the books, for making this policy. And we will now have 5 minutes for open discussion with each other, if we would like to use that. Before we move on to another round of 1 minute per board member. Does anyone have anything to add?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If a parent is uncomfortable with having, for whatever reason, their child being on a video surveillance, they have the choice to say, I'm just going to choose to take my child to school and not ride the bus, or I'm going to choose to drive my student to a sporting event versus taking the bus. And I'm not saying that that might come up, but I know that there's some cases where perhaps they don't want to be on a video surveillance on a school bus. And so the parents have this information before a student rides the bus. Is that correct? Like they are being informed that they're going to be, that's not a question, just looking, asking questions, that they will be subject to video recording if they are riding a public transportation.
I can't answer your question, but I think as a parent that we sign a release, a photo release, which would include that. Our time's not running. But that's a good point, that parents should be made aware. I believe in registration, we sign a release, or we indicate and release.
Just again, just to have an awareness. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, I don't want to get conspiracy, but if somebody's in like some kind of protection that they don't want to be recorded, that they know that this is happening. Not because I'm watching too many spy movies, just saying.
No, I think that's a valid point. Any other comments for open discussion on this one?
I'm just curious if Chief Gatlin at the end can answer the question, is this video like forever stored, or is there a certain amount of time in which it is stored and then gone, and like is it into perpetuity that is there?
I think that's again in the regulations versus the policy, right? The policy is the broader overarching policy, the regulations, they get into the nitty gritty. So I'm sure that he can when we go back to our round robin. Any other comments for discussion on this one? Okay, so we'll pop back into giving each board member 1 minute. And at this time, we can ask questions of Chief Gatlin or share additional comments. And we'll start back with Director Stepp.
I guess my only question is, do you feel that that these policies are sufficient to keep people safe, both the drivers and the students? I know it's not 100% guaranteed, but is this sufficient?
Yeah, I think there's only so much we can do to provide or ensure safety. You can't ensure it, right? But I think this is another tool in our toolkit, and we use this. We use our camera systems regularly, and they're a big asset, and they do help. They do ensure that that we're responding to situations appropriately. That's the key difference in this too. Typically this is a responsive measure. It's not a proactive measure. Sometimes, there could be a nudge around if people know there's camera footage, rolling or in use that can help. But this is a great tool for us to ensure that we're responding appropriately and handling situations appropriately. So I think it's a hard question to say, like, just providing us adequate safety. It's one tool that we have that really helps.
Okay, thanks.
Director Ramirez.
I guess my only question is, speaking to the regulations piece, are you guys, how are you guys making sure that you guys are being proactive when it comes to making sure that this is enforced, or at least is being utilized by our staff?
And is that, Jasmine, is that more around ensuring that it's working?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good question. I'm glad I can speak to that. Couple things. We had a bit of an antiquated system in our buses previously. And part of the problem with it was it was kind of a pain to access footage. So we didn't do it regularly. So then when we needed to access footage, we found, it's not working. And that was a source of great frustration. It was also part of the reason why in our capital budget this last year, you were upgrading all of our camera systems in our buses. Part of the new system that I'm excited about is when the buses take footage and they kind of roll back in towards the bus facilities, they actually download data and we get a report to know what did we successfully receive the data. And so we have some new tools to help ensure that we aren't surprised by that. So and that does get into the regulation side about how we're operating, and that's on me, that's on our transportation department to make sure that they're operating appropriately, and certainly was a frustration in the past that I'm hoping we solve.
Thank you so much.
Director Torres?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Director Tightler?
Just the question I asked earlier, is that always kept forever?
Yeah, so it typically eats its own tail, right? So it'll only store so much footage. It'll only retain it for a certain amount of time, and it'll start to rewrite over itself. So part of the regulations is around a guarantee of how long footage is accessible for viewing requests and viewing retrieval. And we just make sure that we can provide a confidence level around whatever that threshold is. If we do have to pull something out, if there's an incident, if there's something that happens and we go through that process, that gets preserved separately from the system itself. And so now the system can go through and write over itself, but we have that specific incident saved.
Thank you.
Yep.
I don't have anything further. Thank you, Chief Gatlin.
Thank you all.
We will now invite Chief Park up for discussion on the discipline policies. The next business in order is information on 3 discipline policies. JICDA, JICA, and JK. And we will move into discussion. For this round, we will begin with Director Ramirez.
Well, thanks again to the team for being willing to take all these policies on as we go through updating them. We just updated some policies in regards to suspensions and expulsions. And so I just wanted to check in, I guess my first question being, did we use those updated policies to make sure that they aligned with these?
Yes.
Perfect. I also wanted to ask about on the code of conduct, JICDA. There was just 2 additions, and I was just wondering if you guys felt that there was any input from school administrators or even counselors that maybe should be taken into consideration for some of the expulsions and some of the suspension history we've had in the past.
You're talking JICDA, the first 2, willful disruption and the stealing and attempting.
Yeah, those were the only additions, correct?
I think to your question with I am not sure actually the review that went prior, because you can see there were edits from 2019. I do know that discipline was a topic discussed at the levels meetings with input from leaders. Counselors, I believe so as well, but I will triple confirm that they have reviewed it and given some input.
Thank you. I'm
Director-
actually okay.
Okay. Director Torres?
So it's very similar to Jasmine, that they're obviously in alignment with the policies that we just approved. So it sounds like, yes, those are all in conjunction together. That's what I was thinking. Thank you.
Director Tightler?
I had a couple of questions on JICDA. Has there been any talk about including something about threatening teachers or behavior involving a threat or harm to students or personnel? Because both of those seem like missing pieces of the suspension and expulsion.
Number 5, engaging in verbal abuse, name calling, ethnic or racial slurs, orally in writing, derogatory statements is, I guess my question is, are you asking the explicit word threat versus having it there.
Okay, I'm thinking more like with school shootings and types of that things where you see like
I see.
journals and things like that, if that would fall under number 5, or is that something separate? Because it seems like that's sort of like a missing piece in this whole expulsion bit. And so that's a thought. And then I have a question on why the student discipline part in JK is that it was redlined, not including the part that say disorderly students also shall be dealt with in a manner which allows other students to learn in an atmosphere which is safe, conducive to the learning process and free from unnecessary disruptions, why that was crossed out.
That is, I have a comment here about why it is crossed out, but it's the end of the first paragraph.
So there's a part that says it's under student discipline, and it says that the board believes that effective student discipline is a prerequisite. And then there was a part that says disorderly students also shall be dealt with in a manner which allows other students to learn in an atmosphere which is safe, conducive to the learning process, and free from unnecessary disruptions. And that was crossed out, and it seems like that's an important thing. I'm not understanding why that was crossed out. Thank you. And then another question I have is, it says later that the board will consult with administrators, teachers, parents, students, and other members of the community in the development and review of the student contact and discipline code. And so is this something that has been done? Like, I'm saying, like, it seems like we're doing this right now, but have we spoken to members of the community? And have we spoken with administrators and teachers and parents to update this, if that's what it's going to say in there?
So this recommendation is made in 2019. Not sure the conversation that happened. In the review of the policy this go round, we thought it would be good practice for the board to adopt this as policy, so that moving forward, our
I can agree with that. Thank you.
Director Stepp?
Yeah. Going back and forth between them. So JCIDA on the second page, I was just curious about number 13 violation.
Sorry,
of board's-
is it JICDA?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, let me get to that.
JCIDA. The board's tobacco-free schools policy. I don't know if so much cigarettes is an issue, but vaping is a huge issue. So I don't know if we need to, I don't know if that's in the board policy or if that needs to be included in here, but I was just curious about that. And then the other one was number 16, the dress code policy. And do we have a dress code policy? I don't know, you know, what that entails. It just seems in this day and age, there isn't much of one.
There is a dress code policy. It has not been updated, but there is in the policy table.
Okay. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, and both of those policies and the list there's about 15 of them, will be brought before you sometime this year for us to update those. And I'm sure if the tobacco one hasn't been updated recently, that it doesn't include vaping, but I think it's a good opportunity for us to update it with the times.
Yes, there's 42 seasons, so we're trying to bring
Yeah.
a few at a time of just J.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, we're voting on this but it lists all those other policies that we haven't looked at yet, so I don't know, it's like a little backwards, but we'll get to them. Of that thing.
I have a couple things on each one, so I'll start with JICDA. Number 5 is confusing to me when I read it. It seems like the language just might need to be cleaned up a little bit. With the number of ors that are all in a row there, it's unclear what's related to the IE versus a further description of verbal abuse. So I'll just say, take a look at that one, and I can suggest language if you want it. And then I had a question on number 24 on that one too, and how it's the repeated interference with the district's ability to provide educational opportunities to other students, how that interacts with Title IX, and do we need to qualify that with like a repeated or extreme interference with the district's ability, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be a repeated, but one extreme interference with someone's ability to participate could qualify under, well, I'm already out of time. Okay. Okay. So now we'll move into 5 minutes of board discussion, and then we'll go back around the table.
Yeah.
So I'm starting with Director Ramirez. this time.
To Director Tyler's point on that disorderly student also shall be dealt with in a manner. If we are to bring that back, I would just want to make sure that that is clarified, because I also think that one of the reasons why we wanted to create updates on the suspension and expulsion policy and make it clear that students could only be suspended or expelled a certain number of times is because I think sometimes there is severe punishment that happens with students, and I just don't want disorderly students to be like a student that is actually needing support services to fall under this. Because I do think, and I can think of a handful of students already who would fall under that, who are students that really just need support from the district and staff because of situations happening in home life. So I just want to make sure that as long as we are very mindful that the language is clear on the manner in which we will deal with these students. And what those, in my opinion, safe, conducive learning process and environments, like what is that? I feel like that has to be clarified.
In JICDA? Or
JK.
in JK, and JK under the habitually disruptive students.
And I think piggybacking on that, in JKG, it talks about expulsion prevention. And it says that the district will provide students who are at risk of expulsion a plan to provide necessary support services to help them avoid suspension and expulsion. And I still think that is a missing piece of how that is given to the students and how the parents know to go and get that and where that support is offered in reality to those students. And so I think that should be a part that is included of how the student and the parents can access that better and more readily.
And I think that comes back to that question again of policy versus implementation and regulation. And so does our policy get into the specifics of how that's implemented, or does our policy provide the overarching, we want this to happen, you figure out how to make it happen?
Yeah.
So, which is that constant tension.
Just a point of clarification on JICDA on number 23. It seems like that could be a pretty broad behavior on or off school property. That could be, I'm thinking of a student at the grocery store. What kind of boundaries or what kind of, guidelines that might fall under? Because a student that's being perhaps disruptive or perhaps maybe even out of control in a public setting, could they be subject to disciplinary action because they're off school property? And
I think that's the point of it, though. It's because it's behavior that's detrimental to other students or school personnel. And so,
right. So would you
even if
hear
they're
about that
off
from the
school-
police or? how would you
I
how would you
think-
how would you know that?
Well, I think you'd either hear about it from parents reporting it or students or potentially the police, but I don't know, this is our discussion. I think the idea being that then those students that were threatened would come back to school and feel unsafe. So that's where the school plays a role in having some disciplinary action. That would be my guess.
I wonder if we could add language, well, because that one very clearly says on or off school property, so I'm assuming it's like when they're not, it's not during school hours, I guess. And I wonder, and you might be thinking of the same incident that I'm thinking about, where I wonder if it's like during school hours, that language needs to be added. Because I do think that there is some opportunity for us to say, like, while there are scholars, we expect this from them. So
I read it a little bit differently. I see it as like something started in school and then it plays out outside of school. And it was because of how it started in school, perhaps, that it escalates at a different time, and that is then a school responsibility because of
We'll
the,
see if we're all seeing it
Nexus of
differently, then if we could see some clarity on.
I think that that's the point of it. I think it's, it's at the end of this list and it's one of those ones that's meant to encompass these behaviors that don't easily fit into one of the other categories, but still require the school to be involved. That's the way I read it, being towards the end of the
and maybe
list,
it's
but-
adding one that, some language in the beginning that says during school.
Because we're talking about the same event. Yeah.
We will start our second round of board discussion. And we will again start with you, Director Ramirez.
Thank you. I guess I want to ask, does this take priority over schools, like a school has the dress code policy, for example? Does our district take superiority over them?
It should, yes.
Okay, and I'm just, because I know in past we've had conversations about schools having their own rules, and I just wonder if there's some accountability in how we make sure it aligns with like our expectations and schools' expectations. And then there was one line number 20, lying or giving false information either verbally or in writing to a district employee. I just wonder if there is some way, and maybe I just answered my own question in my head. I did. I answered my own question because they would ask you, Madam CAO, if it was valid. So thank you very much.
Director Torres.
Can I just comment really quickly on the dress code? So with any of our policies, that the policies that you all set as a board, the regulation has to be in alignment with that policy. So if you're saying in policy that, we have to go to the community to talk about J policies, we can't write in regulation, we're not going to the community to talk about regulation. The same is true with dress code, all of the other policies you have, smoking, tobacco products on campuses, etc. So schools do have the flexibility to add their unique identities within the school, as long as it doesn't contradict what's happening in the board policy. So
Thank you. Director Torres.
I found it when you all were talking and then I moved. So it was the local restrictions on the threatening to use any knife. I'm thinking of kids being selling with, in the lunchroom and a butter knife like that. That would fall under this definition, using any knife regardless of the length or the blade.
Is that JICI?
I'm sorry, yeah, JICI.
Mhm. And sorry, can you repeat which part?
Under local restrictions.
I see.
yeah, at the end, therefore, the using, possession, or threatening to use any knife regardless of the length of the blade on district property. The use of any knife, I mean, I think we all think that that would be a knife that's sharp, a knife that could cause harm. I don't know if it needs to be clarified. I would not want to make that more specific, but I think there needs to be some, I could see one kid with a butter knife in a cafeteria being rambunctious, yes, and not understanding the consequences of those actions to have some severe consequences. So just clarification in that.
Yep, I can comment on it. So you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned a younger student versus an older student, but I appreciate the question because I think we're trying to make these explicit as possible. And, part of the, before any kind of suspension or expulsion, there is that clear conversation to determine things like intent, manner, like purpose. And so butter knife used, anyone can interpret as I used it or I had it, is very different than use it with intent to harm. And so that the part of the regulation piece is to ensure that there is also that clear determination.
I think the intent on the local restrictions also is like thinking about a 2-inch blade, for example, which is dangerous and can cause some pretty serious harm, but falls under that 3-inch blade definition. And so I think the intent is there, right? So like if it's like plastic ware knife, same thing, we're gonna discretionarily apply the consequences or next steps or whatever as outlined in regulation. You didn't ask it in this round, but you asked it in the discussion, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the other question that you had during the discussion.
Was it the video surveillance?
On or
No.
off campus?
During school hours?
During.
Yeah,
during
sorry,
school hours,
during the
yes.
school hours. So there's a couple of things there. I think you all did arrive at the conclusion of the intent there, but we have, for example, and y'all heard of one of these incidents and toward the end of the school year, a student who left campus, did something pretty serious here in Carbondale, and then went back to campus. And so we as a school district had to follow up on those actions. I think Director Tytler, you mentioned sometimes things happen at school, start at school, and then they go into the community. And you're right, spot on those incidents happen. Sometimes also things that happen in the community and then come back to school. So if you have students, for example, who a student's getting bullied in the neighborhood, those 2 students still have to come back to school the next day. And so we're left to kind of have to, respond to those accordingly. Thank you for the reminder.
Director Tytler?
One more question on just logistics. In the JK, it says that in addition, any significant change in the code will be provided to students and posted in school. So this is a significant change in our code. Are we giving this out to all students after we make these changes?
I think would be something that is either added to a handbook or shared with families to make that clear.
Yes.
So yes.
Okay. I
One
don't
of
know.
the things I would note too is that we have a student handbook that contains almost all of the J policies. And so while they're pretty much all out of date right now, once we update them, then we distribute that, have it available on our website every year.
Okay.
Director Stepp?
I don't have any further questions at this time.
I just had a couple of notes on JICI and JK. In JICI under firearm facsimiles, the first sentence in that paragraph goes all the way over onto the second page and is a bit confusing. And I think it would make it a lot clearer if you started with students are prohibited from versus ending with that. And then throughout both of these policies, the title of JICDA should be updated because it's the old title is referenced in both of these policies. And then under student discipline, there's a sentence that was added per CASB under discipline of habitually disruptive students that was confusing to me, and it's the red sentence. Material and substantial disruption could include creating disorder and significantly and adversely impacting the delivery of instruction, inciting violence and fear among faculty or students, or generally it needs to be interfering with the school's mission to educate its students. But I think that that just needs to be cleaned up. There are just so many ands and separate clauses in there. That's unclear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on that one part? Yes, I agree. And wanted to put something specific so that habitually disruptive students was not open to interpretation. So yes, but definitely clean that up.
Yeah, specifically, I think just changing the first and to that clears it up. Thank you, Chief Park.
Thank you.
Chief Markham, we will invite you up next for finance policies. The next business in order is information on 3 finance policies. And we will move into discussion, starting with Director Torres.
Let me get this. Hold on. Don't start with things. It's tough when you get the first one. Like,
Uh-huh.
close all these tabs.
It was Maureen every time last meeting. We finished that.
All right. All right, so since I'm first, this is the first question a lot of us had. Could you, Chief Markham, just describe or tell us why that first paragraph, that sentence was oh, sorry, on DBD? Thank you. Policy DBD and that strikeout of a minimum of blank percentage of district resources shall be allocated to instruction.
Certainly. So a number of reasons. One is like it's a little in the weeds for policy. The second, it could inadvertently restrict in cases of, like we've seen over the last 2 years, if we had to direct resources to just staying open or providing other services to kids. And really, when you look down to the numbered, the system will determine how resources are currently allocated by school. The third one there, align resources to achieve the goals. That's really what should drive how we're allocating resources in our schools. How we allocate is a reflection of our values. I think we'd always value instruction, but if something were to change, I wouldn't want to be hamstrung by a policy. Other reasons you get what is instruction? So what percentage of Superintendent Rodriguez, of Chief Park, of Chief Gatlin? I mean, you get really into the weeds defining instruction or what is that? What does that look like?
Thank you.
Director Tightler.
Sort of piggybacking on that in DBD number 2, it says determination of budget priorities. Number 2 is link specific inputs with results for students and determine whether the current allocation of resources is effective in raising student achievement. So in what ways have we as a school really looked at student achievement and the money that we're giving into that area together? Has there been any kind of linkage of that?
I think what we're talking about tonight is the policy that does that and not the specific ways that's been done. I think that's, certainly within the confines or this discussion, we can have it a later time. But I think tonight it's really, is this the policy we want for our district?
Okay. And then it's just as part of DB under the budget, there was just a part I didn't understand. I think it was just wordage. It said in the middle of budget where it said the board assigns to the superintendent overall responsibility. Later on in that it says, as part of the superintendent's budget responsibility, the superintendent will cause to be prepared. I don't understand the will cause to be. I think it's just a typo, probably.
I think maybe perhaps instead of cause, we'll organize a calendar to be put
Just
together.
something, that was it. I think that's it.
Thank you. Director Stepp?
In DBD, it says the district accountability committee will make recommendations. I think we're just trying to get our district accountability committee going again, because that hasn't happened since my time here. I don't know if we need to put anything in here about, because I know this has come up in the past about a board priority and allocating funds for, something specific there. Would that come at the same time as the district accountability recommendations? Like the board could make the recommendation, or, again, I don't know if it needs to be a policy, but
I think that's a good point. And then depending on how this policy shakes out, I think that's, a conversation of what's the order of operations, how this is written. I'd interpret it that you get information from the DAC and that informs your decisions on budget priorities.
thanks.
Thank you. Director Ramirez?
Thank you. I also wanted to ask about the strike through in policy DB in regards to the accumulation of the full percentage for the general fund balance. I did read Angie's note, but I was hoping you could give us a little bit more insight on that.
I'm sorry, which policy?
DB, it's on top of expenditure reserves. It's under operating reserves. There's a strike through accumulation of the full percentage general fund balance will be completed by the end of the blank fiscal year unless otherwise approved by the board.
That appears to be slightly redundant. I mean, reserves are always calculated at the end of the year, not on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's the official accounting of our district is when we get our audit back. We'll know our, I think it's implied that it's at the end of the year.
Okay. Sorry, I had read Angie's note, and so I would assume that there was a set amount of percentage year-end fund balance in addition to Tabor, and it was not required by law. So I just assumed, but it might be talking about that whole paragraph, so I apologize.
Yeah, so I think that's in reference to the full paragraph, and the 10% is typically what we have targeted previously, which we're substantially above right now.
Okay, and that number changed, or that number?
I think that was likely. So again, I think this was first updated by my predecessor in 2018 or 19.
Okay.
So I think that was probably a blank space that the district could fill in itself. And the numbers I've always been told and seen on non-policy, but kind of procedure related documents has been 10%.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I had a similar question related to that same paragraph. Do you agree that it's wise to have a hard number of 10% in policy? Or is that too detailed in changing environments and years where things come up?
I would prefer a recommended target. It just
Okay.
gives you a little more flexibility. In years we can meet that target and it's no problem. In years when we need to tap that, you're not bumping up against policy, or you tap into that reserve and the next year the policy is saying you have to get back there. So then you're kind of you're basically borrowing from the future to fund the current. I prefer something that gives you a goal rather than a must.
I would support that change in the policy. In DBD, the references to accountability committees have got to be cleaned up because it references school accountability committees. Says the superintendent will also consider the accountability committee, but doesn't say which one. talks about the DAC at the top and doesn't itemize it down at the bottom when it lists out what's considered. So I think we need to look at that and just make sure that it's cleaned up and aligns. And then it also references in 16 in that policy, that 10% target number again. So if that's altered, it would have to be altered in that policy as well. And then,
And then I'll talk about it in my 5
yeah.
minutes.
Okay, we'll move into 5 minutes of discussion. Can I start it with this question actually? So I don't know if anybody else read DBG, but we're supposed to be having a budget hearing as a board where the board presents and explains the proposed budget, inviting questions and discussion from the audience per this policy, which we didn't do this spring.
Wherever.
And I don't know if that is, and again, I was working off a printed copy, so I don't know if there were. This is a CASB recommendation. I don't know if that's a requirement. I don't feel particularly like I am the person that should be presenting a budget to people and answering questions in a hearing style convening of the public. And so I don't know if that's
You want to change
something we
that
have to
language?
do, or if that is something that we can opt to do. But it doesn't seem like any of us are really qualified to present and explain in full a proposed budget after watching Nathan do it this spring.
Well, I almost wonder we could change that word to say the superintendent or his designee or his her designee. Because I do think that there's some value and there have been questions in the past about transparency when it comes to our budget. So, you know, and I do feel like I have understood our budget better with recent presentations. So I really appreciate that. And it is part of our policy, and something that I wanted to ask when I get a second chance is we use layperson, understandable by a layperson a lot. And yet in the past, as board members, there were many times in my experience where I did not understand or I did not feel confident in the budget. So I do feel like there is an opportunity for us to use this as you know, almost pipeline to say, we want those who are interested, including the DAC if they're interested, to come and have an opportunity to hear from our CAO and get to know
CFO.
Nathan better.
CFO.
CFO, sorry.
She's the money person.
Sorry. I'm
Sorry, Chief
Too
Burke.
many.
I'm out.
I
And
apologize.
yeah, also in this same policy, it says within 10 days of submission of the proposed budget.
Yeah.
By our CFO, we're gonna publish it in the newspaper that we're having this hearing.
Let me do that already.
We do that, yeah, and we just, like in the spring, we just published it for our next board meeting?
Mhm.
Okay,
So
so we
that
just failed
14
to
day
adhere
unknown
to
period.
the board presenting it. So the question is, can we alter that, or is that a statutory requirement that the board presents it?
Well, and then plus inviting questions and discussion,
Right.
which
Right.
is very different than
A board meeting.
a board meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be, hey, we're talking about at a board meeting, which is not an interactive
Right.
forum, but rather this is a very specific, very focused, very deliberate
Town hall style.
town hall style
Yeah.
with the budget. Yeah. I think there's tremendous value in doing that, not necessarily being the one to present that, but I think being able to say, now we're going to hear more details about this budget. Here's an opportunity for us to hear what the public or the community has to say and invite some discussion. Which I think
I
could be
think in the
valuable.
past though, we've opened it up and there hasn't been any, if I'm wrong, Nathan, like nobody's commented or responded.
I do hear why the board is there in that statement, because if we're saying how we react to comments and it has to come from one voice and one person. And so if it is going to be some kind of discussion, who is going to be that voice for us to answer in an open forum? And then if you have a person coming who's disgruntled, or where's that voice of that one person expecting answers from who? And is opening up a bit of a can of worms, it seems, to have that discussion in that sense, to like right off the cuff have to come up with an answer to the person's comment.
Again, I guess it just circles back to the question of, is this a requirement, or can we change that language so that it says the superintendent or
His
is it her
designee.
designee?
With
Yeah.
maybe some board members who would like to be in attendance. I don't know. I mean, the only thing I wanted to say before our time runs out was that I am glad that we changed the date to January 31st for the ability for us to review and change the budget with respect to both revenues and expenditures. So I thought that was a big difference from October to January.
Okay, so we'll go back to 1 more minute for each director, and we begin with Director Torres.
I do not have additional questions.
Director Tyler.
I guess I have one more question. I don't know. I think it's maybe the same question I've been asking. It's going to be if it's policy or what's the other one? Regulation. And I have a question, just all the times what you had mentioned to Director Kuhlenberg about all the times it is mentioned about accountability committee in here. And like, we're keep saying the accountability committee has to do this for us and we have to follow this lead of the accountability committee. And if we don't have accountability committees who are doing this at this point, at what point should we be including that? Or is that my same answer of policy and regulation? It's like the fact that it's included time and time again about the accountability committee will have this power. And if we're not having that accountability committee, how does that go? And I see Kelsey, I'm sorry, Chief being ready to answer.
Yeah, so the District Accountability Committee met, I think for the second time this year last night, and this was a specific topic that they had. So you all approved, I think, 6 members in the spring. So they're kind of building, but they are definitely anticipating, hoping, they're planning to provide recommendations on the budget this year. So I think that will be new in a way that it hasn't been in the past.
Recommendations are on priorities for you all based off of what they learned through their engagement with us as staff in the district unified improvement plan, but also in their connections, and they have a plan and a timeline to meet with each of our 14 schools advisory committees as well, to inform the priorities that they recommend to you all to prioritize.
That's it. Thank you.
Director Stepp.
I have a question, but I don't think it has to do with the policy, but when we were touring the school the other day, they said, oh, we budgeted for this amount of students, and then we ended up having way more, but we don't have, like, how much contingency do the schools have to adjust their personnel? Or like, I think as a district, we have some contingency funding. And I don't know if that money comes from the district budget or the school budget, or how does that flexibility work?
Again, that's more in procedure and kind of not on the topic of, is this the policies that we want for our district tonight? I'm happy to have.
And we
that
can talk about it
conversation.
when we get to the budget, but I was just
Yeah.
curious if that was built in somewhere.
Director Ramirez.
That might be a good board note catcher question.
I think along the lines of this conversation about the DAC and the school level accountability committees, I wonder if there is room for us to put a checks and balances to make sure that, and I think this might be the tool, to be honest, that we are not only making sure that each school has a viable accountability committee, because that is also state law, but also that this is a good checks and balances for us as a board to say that we are going to, it's the superintendent will also consider the accountability committee. It just sort of sets us up and all future superintendents of like, this is, we have to have that. And so my question is, is there space to maybe add some verbiage to say that we're going to check to make sure that every school has not only a viable school level accountability committee, but that it's inclusive of the demographics, because that is what we are hopeful for the DAC and all of our school SACs, which is what they're.
Sorry, I'm not sure what the question was again.
Just to make sure all our schools have their accountability committees in place and that it's reflective of the demographics of the school.
Yeah, I just wonder if we could add that language to this document.
Do we have other policies that govern accountability committees, and maybe it would
Yeah,
be
and
better,
that's,
better
I
to
guess
live
maybe that
there
was
than
my
in a
question.
budget.
Yes.
Thank you for re-asking my question.
I will say, everywhere it says will and must in here kind of screams out for a checklist for me, right? And you just take that sentence and put it in it, and here's the date we did that. We can check it off the list, and then you guys can have comfort. We've met everything here. Because yes, we remember having that meeting, remember attending this working session. Because this is a lot to keep, all the wills and musts in here. We're very sorry. Because I think they got changed from shall.
I don't have anything else, but I think that if we clean up the language around the accountability committees and that, it will be clearer. And thank you. Thank you for bringing these, for updating these. And thank you all for providing thoughtful input. Okay. We're only 1 minute behind schedule. Okay, let's move on to appreciations for the evening, and Director Stepp.
Wait, do we do board reports and comments? So we have
Wait.
to find another 16
Oh,
minutes
sorry,
somewhere.
I'm sorry, man.
I was gonna say,
Oh, I
actually,
skipped it. Okay, sorry. All right, next business in order is board reports and comments. Missed it. I'm jumping ahead. We will begin with Director Tyler.
I would just like to say, it's been nice to be able to visit the school as part of our time of meeting, and it was nice to get to see the schools, but more like comment that I have would be a couple things about the formatting of our new way in which we are running our meetings. I appreciate the time. We have our 1 minute and 5 minutes, but I sometimes feel like it's a limiting factor. And if we can still have some time to fine tune that a little bit. And an example of that I think is when we were having our conversation about CMAS and the paper testing, and like, that was something like somebody from that row could have probably just stopped us and say that isn't happening, and not taking that time. And I don't know if there can be something within that that can stop that conversation, and like not having us banter back and forth on something that you know the answer to and we're maybe just questioning. And so it seems like sometimes those 5 minutes are just a little bit needing help from you all. And so I would like to consider us talking about that a little bit. And then one other thing is, I would like us to perhaps have a future discussion on the district unified improvement plan, because in our predecessor and the conversation we last had about that, it was sort of seemed like that was a superfluous thing that we really don't follow, and it's just checking off boxes. And now I've heard a couple times in our last meetings about the importance of that. And so I just think that's something that should be talked about at some point, of how we want to talk about the UIP.
Thank you. Director Stepp.
Just an FYI, the Aspen Community Foundation is convening a group of people in the Valley around career and technical opportunities, which includes the Colorado River BOCES, representatives from CMC, Youth Entity, CareerWise, and RE2 and RE1, our school district. So that ball is continuing to move slowly uphill, but it's moving.
Thank you. Dr. Ramirez. Director Ramirez. It's getting late.
I like that. I actually felt like today went much better. I do agree that there are sometimes it feels a little jittery, but I do think we're getting the groove of it. I guess I'll just follow up on the conversation we had earlier of hoping that maybe we can maybe talk about our committees again and talk about where we fall within that. I think it's really important for us as board members to be able to spend some time on that work. And so I would welcome that conversation for us sooner rather than later on what we can participate in and what the spaces that we need to also have school district voice in. So, yeah.
Thank you. Director Torres.
Well, that was pretty much what I was gonna say. I would love to bring that back to the table, get a sense. I mean, we talked about it too, that, you know, Kenny was on, or Director Taylor, sorry, was on the IBB, and does somebody else need to be on IBB, or would he love to do that again, or what other committees we're on? We have partnerships that I think would be another really valuable piece of discussion, because we live in a community that is incredibly diverse and robust in talent. And I don't think we are maximizing the usage as best as we could. Or if we are, then the others don't know about it. So I think it's a really important piece. And then we could share updates on those committees that we're all sitting on to just obviously keep us all in the loop as to what's going on.
I was going to comment kind of on the same thing, and I was hoping to maybe join forces with one other willing board member who would take a stab at some operating norms with me as a board, these more detailed things that we want to see, and then we can take a stab at it, bring it to you all, talk about it before we make any decisions. But it seems like something that we need to do to expand upon the operating norms and get into the operating procedures, which are two different things in my mind. We don't have to decide that now, but I'm willing to work on it if someone else wants to jump on with me. Nobody's jumping out of their chair, but think about it. And that's all that I had for now. So we'll have 5 minutes now for open discussion with each other.
So I was super excited to see that you guys have posted your dates for the superintendent's event. And I'm just wondering, and I felt like this was a good opportunity to bring up a conversation, if you want us to attend, if you don't want us to attend, because obviously there's also an opportunity there for you to meet the community on your own and to sort of have that conversation so that we knew what the expectation was for us as board members. And then the only other thing was I really hope that we could have the opportunity to have a like welcoming gathering type of like welcome back to school night for the district, where we could have our staff and us and whoever wanted to come and meet you and meet us and have a little carne asada, if you will.
I think that the sessions are virtual.
Yeah, they are virtual.
Oh, yeah.
So
Please do figure out
Hop
if there's
on.
a time that works for you all. We'd love to have y'all join.
Do we have to make sure there's only 2 of us at each one?
Since
Well,
it's
we won't be
virtual.
talking.
Yeah, we want to
Webinar.
notice it to, you're not making any,
we're not going to be discussing
yeah, so
amongst each
I
other.
think the fact that it's on there, I had a conversation with a lawyer at one point, I think we're good.
I think we're just there to listen.
Because I think we're just setting it up as a webinar panel style, so y'all won't know who else is in there.
Nobody else wants to draft operating.
I
norms
will.
with me?
I was gonna tell you.
Well, and I wonder if that's something that we can do, collaboratively, like if it's a working document, because I think all of us have some input.
That does violate. I think if we have a working document, right, then it violates sunshine. So it can only be 2 of us taking a shot at the first round, and then we can share and have 2 others or tackle it in a working session. if we find
Natalie, I
it.
don't want to get in your way of wanting to do that, but I would also do it if
Get that.
There
you
you
are
go.
not feeling it.
I
So.
was gonna say the retired board member, but you're not really retired.
Not at this point. Give
The
me another few
working
weeks.
retired.
The other thing I would like to talk about just really quickly in our little bit of time, do we have any conversations about CASB, are we going to CASB, and are we going as a group? Because I'm imagining that deadline for registration is approaching at some point. And so what is our thoughts on wanting to go as a group? And I know when I went last year, it was informative, but I also felt like it would have been much more of a rich experience if we had our board to talk together. And I don't know then if we're allowed to talk together again, and if that's violating some sunshine something. So
I guess just to add to that too, as much as I have appreciated going to CASB and I've learned so much, the School Board Partners program that I'm in is hosting because of the pandemic, is hosting its first in-person conference for school board leaders across the nation. It's going to be in Knoxville this year, and I would much rather go to that than CASB, to be completely honest, because I feel it's more geared to us having like very sincere conversations about how we govern. And so I just wanted to pose that conversation, and I don't know how we would have that conversation of like, is that something that we can even consider doing as an alternative? We've never really, I mean, we don't even know what our professional development budget is, so.
I can tell you that CASB registration opened and closed. And so I think I had sent out an email whenever that happened, and there are 5 seats registered. I know we were assuming there would be a mix. I heard from some people who had wanted to go at that time, and so I registered you. But I think there's a little bit of flexibility. So I can speak to that part.
Sounds like this is a discussion we need to have ASAP, time sensitive. Kelsey, maybe we can connect and then maybe you and I can connect and then go from there and figure out logistics and specifics and what it all looks like.
And I'll send out our collective power conference information, because I would love for you guys, I would love for us obviously to attend and go as a group, and they obviously have pricing for school board leaders and fellows and everything. But I do think it'd be awesome.
We now have another minute each. That. Am I being told no? I think we do. We now have another minute each. So Director Zeitler, do you have anything additional to add?
I'm good to go.
Director Stepp? Director Ramirez?
I just wanted to thank Glenwood Springs High School for hosting us, and I really enjoyed greeting kiddos when we went back to school, and I really appreciate the team's efforts to make sure that we were there greeting students, and I just thought it was really nice to welcome all our kiddos back that way, and then to be able to tour the schools and see our principals was a really good follow-up. So.
Director Torres?
We'll have appreciations after this. Okay, I'm good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was appreciation.
All right, let's move
I don't
to
have
appreciation. Director Stepp, we're going to start with you for appreciation.
I also wanted to thank the Glenwood Springs High School's principal and staff for a very informative tour. I wanted to appreciate Dr. Rodriguez for your board updates. They're very helpful. And you've been very visible in the community. And the fact that you went rafting with 6th graders is awesome. It just feels like you're jumping right in and becoming part of this community, and it shows. So thank you.
Director Ramirez, do you want the opportunity to do another?
Yeah,
Okay.
ditto to what Director Stepp said, and thank you to the team for your guys' work on our policies. And I know this is different for all of us, but I really appreciate all of the time and commitment and being so thorough and so willing to partake in this moment for our district. So thank you guys.
Director Torres?
I want to thank Roaring Fork High School and Principal Megan Bayardo. All of a sudden, it just almost escaped my brain. I felt like we were walking through the classrooms and I didn't want to leave the class. I was learning so much and I was like, I had no idea. And these kids were playing games, it was incredibly inspiring and tremendous energy and passion in the classroom, which I really appreciate, which leads me into also appreciating Chief Parks with such optimism and coming into a role saying, well, these aren't ideal scores where we want to be, but we're going to get there, and really having a positive outlook. I really appreciate that. And knowing that we'll get there with you at the lead is really great. Thank you.
Director Tightway?
I would like to give a shout out to the teachers. Going back as a long-term sub, I forget how hard it is to be a teacher, and the patience and the repetitiveness that you have to, on a daily basis, continue to have. And I think I also feel it's been compounded by the whole COVID times and that time away. And it seems like there's a bit of a restlessness that hasn't quite returned in the students in a sense. And so I know that that is something that teachers are dealing with on a daily basis. And it sometimes goes unsaid of the work that takes to continue to have that positive attitude, to continue to move forward and smile through the day. And it's an important part. And so I want to thank the teachers who do that so well.
Thanks. I wanted to broadly thank all of our teachers and administrators, but specifically, this is the first time as a parent I've gotten to go into the schools for a back to school night because my kindergartner started during the first year of COVID. And so last week I got to actually go as a parent to Basalt Elementary, visit the classrooms, talk to the teachers, see the cafeteria, the art room, the gym, all these places that I haven't been because the schools have been so closed down, and just the effort that each of them put into preparing for that night, having the students super excited about coming in and showing everyone around, and just building excitement about getting back to school. Because as Kenny said, it is exhausting day in and day out to be a teacher. So for them to stay that night and do that for us, it just felt really special, it being the first time when my child's going into her third year in school. This is the first time that I got to experience that. So I was very appreciative of that. And then I ran out of time.
I think you can keep going. I don't know that appreciations have to, I don't know, that's
Okay.
my.
And then lastly, I just wanted to thank all of you, because I know that this has been a huge process of transition over the past couple of months. And each of you have probably had to take on more than you typically would have, and bringing Dr. Rodriguez and Chief Park up to speed, getting everything going, keeping everything running smoothly, and just making sure that everything happens that needs to happen in a normal back to school year is a lot. And I'm sure that that was all amplified this year. It feels like at this point, we've hit the ground running, everything's going. Probably doesn't feel like that for all of you at times. But again, from a parent perspective, seems like all is well in RFSD. So thank you to each of you, and those of you that are, of your team that aren't here, because I know that that's been a lot. Okay, so 8 minutes late, not bad. But if there's no further business and no objection, the meeting will be adjourned. It is 8:23 p.m.